everything set up. Was running behind, but all right. So, this discussion today is going to be regarding sexual assault and rape. So, at any point this conversation becomes too much for you, please don't feel like you need to stay to continue with this conversation. We may not even get anybody that tunes in, but it is what it is. So, biggest thing that I wanted to discuss. All right, so obviously people know that I've gone through my own sexual assault and trauma prior to the military, during the military. And one of the questions that I've been asked regarding my incident is, since I've been active duty, is what was the reason why that I did not go forward with my story as far as reporting it. The biggest reason why was because of the fact that I was, number one, was worried about what people would say, the squadron looking at me differently or treating me differently. I was worried about one of the biggest things that people deal with and that you'll hear people talk about is what happens during the trial, and that the trial is pretty much a point where the victim is being blamed for the incident, or the victim's past is brought up. The victim, pretty much what in the victim's past would make them seem that they're not a trustworthy person. Is there anything in their past that they may have lied about, or things that they may have done that would make them seem like they are basically liar, right? And I just didn't want to deal with any of that. I watched someone else in my unit go through their reporting, and when they went through their reporting, the focus was more on them being drinking underage versus the actual assault itself. So I was not going to put myself in that situation. So I just dealt with it on my own. There's also questions on whether I regret the fact that I did not report. And yes, I do regret it for the simple fact that I know there's a strong potential that these groups of individuals may have done similar instances or similar things to other people. So that's why I regret it, because I hate that the fact that someone else may have gone through the same thing that I've gone through, or had the potential to go through the same thing. So that was more of the reason why I regret that I didn't go forward with my particular incident. There was one particular individual that I was stationed with in Germany that posted their blog this week regarding their sexual assault. And it had me in my feelings. Number one, because this individual was sexually assaulted while in tech school, and reported it, came to her first duty station, which was where I was stationed at. The entire time she was there, no one knew that she was going through, the turmoil of just being sexually assaulted, having to deal with the stuff leading up to the trial in a whole nother state, a whole nother country. And only person who knew anything about what was going on was her supervisor. So I was hurt by that. Not that she hurt me. So let me be clear when I say that. I was hurt because she was going through a time that is so hard to deal with for anyone, but dealing with it in a new country with people you don't really know, and having to deal and interact with people back stateside while going through this is too much for one person to bear by themselves. That was my biggest issue. Was that she was having to go through this ordeal by herself. But not even the fact that she was going through it by herself, but she's having to go through it by herself in a different country, right? And still having to talk to lawyers back in the States and all of this stuff, not knowing that she had someone there who could have been an emotional support system for her, right? Because she didn't know that I had gone through a similar incident. She didn't know that that she had someone she could have been talking to that could have helped her through that process. So that's why I was hurt, because I hated that she had to go through that by herself. But if you talk to a lot of victims of sexual assault, one of the things that they will tell you is that the reason why they're scared to come forward is because they're scared of the judgment, and they're scared of what people may say and how people will look at them, or people may treat them differently. And that's one of the major reasons why people don't come forward. And then when they do come forward, it's usually years later or time down the road. Well, why? Why did you wait so long is usually the question that you hear. And usually it's because they've just now gotten their voice. They have found their voice that they may not have had or felt that they had before. Usually because they've seen other people come forward now. They've seen successes from people coming forward and getting justice, talking to other people and people sharing their insight and what they went through. All of these things will make someone eventually come forward. It's not going to be an easy process. For me, for my molestation as a child, it took me years before I told my mom what I went through. Mainly because I was scared of what she would do. I was scared of the person who did it may do something to me for telling. And so there's a lot of different reasons why people don't come forward when it happens. But one thing that I'll say is blaming the victim or putting a focus on what they could have done different, or, sucks. And so even with this current incident that everybody's seeing in the news right now with Antonio Brown, his possible victim put herself in a lot of compromising positions. And so a lot of the things that are going to come from that is, well, she put herself in these situations because of X, Y, and Z or whatever, and because she thought they had a relationship that was different than what they had. But at the same time, if you look at the particular accounts of what she explains happened, how can you think that you had a brother-sister relationship when he has obviously already compromised that friendship or that relationship two separate other occasions prior to the actual rape incident? So that's going to be a big topic of conversation, I guarantee, going forward in the trial, or if it even makes it to that point. But I've noticed in the last 2 weeks, ever since they've developed the Air Force Wingman outreach page, that there have been more sexual assaults that have happened in the military than people probably were realizing. You read a lot of people who've come forward and told their stories on that page, and they tell you multiple incidents where they were sexually assaulted or harassed or manipulated into sexual favors and all of these things. And a lot of those incidents were reported, and a lot of those incidents weren't. And a lot of those incidents that were reported, the individuals are telling you that they were the ones who were put on the hot seat and drugged through the mud during the trial and all of these things. So that's another reason which turns people off from wanting to go report their incidents, because of how they are treated when it comes time for the trial. Which I don't know if they're ever going to change that. I personally think that's going to continue to be the process. Do I agree with it? Absolutely not. Yes, you need to be able to tell who's telling the truth from who's lying, because yes, a lot of people do come forward with false accusations of rape and sexual assault. But that doesn't mean you treat every person who's a potential victim that way to try and prove a point, to prove that they're lying, or that they're not being honest, or that they have a past or a history of lying. You can't do that. Because now you're just going to keep people from wanting to come forward. So you have people that were legitimately raped or assaulted that are no longer going to go and tell their story, or turn in the person who committed the crime. And then when you focus on things like underage drinking, or that there was alcohol involved, or all these other pieces of it, then you're taking away from what actually happened, which was the assault or the rape or the sodomy, or whatever the case may be. And I also want to be clear in this conversation that saying sexual assault and rape does not just happen to women. A lot of people are like, men don't get raped. Yes, they do. You'd be surprised how many men are raped downrange. On deployments is when it happens the most. And a lot of times they don't come forward. And when they do, it's because they had to, because of the way it happened, or how they were found afterwards, or they were injured due to that rape. But there are a lot of men who are raped and don't come forward, or don't share their story. But I think you're going to see in the next 6 months, as far as the military is concerned, you're going to see a lot more people coming forward with their incidents. They may not be reporting them, but telling their story of what has happened. Because now that you've had this across the Air Force, so many people do this tactical pause day for resiliency. You've started to see a lot more leadership, a lot more people across the board coming forward, telling their stories of resiliency and strength, and things that they've gone through, and how they're still standing. So I think you're going to see a lot more of these incidents being more vocalized, which back in 2017, 2016, probably 2016, I said this. I said that this needed to happen, that people needed to come forward. I actually went to the sapper folks at Ramstein and told them that people needed to come forward and give their accounts of what sexual assault they've gone through, and their story, so that more people are willing to come forward and tell theirs. And I attempted to start I don't know what to call it, but I attempted to go to the radio station and tell my story, and to have it put in the paper. But the only thing that didn't is because they were concerned that I would be pushed to have to report it, even though I didn't want to report it. This thing's getting on my nerves. So I've been talking about this for a long time, and I've also been talking about, obviously, depression and PTSD and all of these things for a long time, and pushing the fact that more people need to come forward and tell their story, so that more people are more willing to seek help, and to get treatment, and to talk about it. And now you're finally seeing it happen. Matter of fact, I talked to Chief Wright about it before he became the Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, when he was our chief at 3rd Air Force. And I told him the same stuff. And so I'm not surprised by the number of suicides that we've seen over the last few years. I'm not surprised about all the stuff we're having to do now to self-correct those issues. But I said these were going to be issues, and it's going to get bad before it gets it's going to get worse before it gets better. But I brought these issues up because I've been seeing the trends, and I've been bringing it up and making sure that people understand that this is something that has to be discussed. We have to talk about the amount of suicides, and we have to talk about the amount of sexual assaults and all these things that are happening, because you're not going to change them unless there's more conversations regarding them. And a lot of people laugh it off because of the amount of people that come forward and lie about their circumstances. But you can't throw everybody in the same pool and say all people are liars because you have a group that lies about their sexual assaults, their rapes, and or their dealings with depression and PTSD. Just because you have people that do it for attention or people do it to try and keep someone in their lives or whatever, you can't throw that towards everybody else and brush off all the people that are really going through these incidents. So I expected it to get to the point that it's at, for it to be as bad as it is, because it has to get bad before it gets better. Just like all the stuff we're seeing across the board in today's society, all the different situations we're seeing and how bad things are getting, it has to get bad. We had we had good years for the last, 8 years or so, where things were okay. They weren't the best. We still had terrible situations that were happening, gun violence and police shootings of unarmed people and all these things. But you started to see them ramp up and get worse and worse and worse progressively, right? Things have to go through a turmoil before we can start to see things get better. What's the saying? Like you always see the storms before you see the rainbows or the sunshine. So that's pretty much what it is. So we have to see the times of where we're seeing the influx of suicides, the influx of sexual assaults, and all these things before we can come up with a solution to kind of taper down on what those situations are and how to correct them. But for those that are dealing with the trauma of being sexually assaulted or raped or harassed or any of those situations, just know you're not alone. There are others like myself that have gone through these situations, and we are still standing, we are still pushing through, and can be a voice for you. So you may not necessarily want to share your story. You may not necessarily want to come forward with what happened to you, but there are those of us who are willing to speak for you. So find someone who has gone through those situations and let them be your light. Let them push for you. Let them speak on your behalf. Let them be a voice for you, because you may not feel comfortable sharing your voice yet. Didn't want to get on here too long and talk about this, because obviously it's a touchy subject for some people. Me, I'm an open book. Obviously, you guys know that I've been on here sharing stuff I've gone through for a while now. I'm not going to stop. I'm going to keep sharing my story, because I feel like there's somebody else going through something that I've gone through. And by me speaking for them is allowing them to have a moment of peace, because I'm speaking on behalf for them. So I'm not going to stop sharing my story. I'm going to keep talking about these incidents. I'm going to keep talking about sexual assault, rape, depression, PTSD, and all these things that I've gone through, because I feel like it's potentially helping someone else to get through their tough times. So it is what it is. But until the next time, love, peace, fish grease. I'm out.